Hey there, my English 101 students. So today we covered a bunch of aspects of research in class, and the main things we covered were, what to do when taking notes on your sources. So essentially, how to responsibly copy over quotes to your notes in a way that will prevent plagiarism. Also, we talked a little bit about bubble maps, skeleton maps, these kind of these mind map activities that help organize your thoughts. And then finally, we talked about the CRAAP test for your sources: the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And so let's kind of start from the top here. When it comes to finding your sources, as you're taking notes on them, it's really helpful to gather quotes as you read. All right, once you've found a source, once you've taken the time to read through it, you really don't want to have to go back and reread that whole source again a couple weeks later when you start writing your paper. So as you're going through, whenever you find a quote that looks really interesting, go ahead and copy it over into your notes and then immediately put quotation marks around it. You know, add that author's name in parentheses after it, and then make sure that you have included a URL to that source, or that you've set up your citation in your notes so that you know exactly where this quote came from. One of the most frustrating things I've ever had happen was I had a source that I used. I took a bunch of notes on it, gathered some quotes from it, and then could not find that source again. I forgot to write down the title or the author's name, and I had no URL to it. And try as I might, I simply could not find that source again. I don't know if it was taken off the internet or if it was in a library and simply not accessible to Google or what. But because I couldn't get access to that source again, I couldn't use it in my paper at all. And by at all, I mean I couldn't even use the facts that I had jotted down from memory of this source. I had to find entirely different sources for that information. So make sure that you are actually citing the information you have. Okay. Now, next, we talked a bit about skeleton maps, bubble maps. These are the kinds of things you've done before. Just like jot down a note and then, indicate which quotes are going to go with that note. The big thing to remember with these maps is that there is no specific format to them. They don't need to be an outline. They don't even need to be the bubble maps. If you just wanted a long list of bullet points, that would work perfectly fine. The only thing these maps need to do is help you write your paper. All right? It's not even required that I'm able to read your handwriting. Now, chances are I can. I used to work in medical records for a couple summers in high school, and so I can read almost any handwriting. But really, it doesn't matter whether or not I can, because these notes are for you. They're for your writing process. I only require you to do them so that I can make sure that you are following a process rather than, putting off your paper till the night before, like I would have done when I was a college student. Um, the Now, this process of mapping is really important when you get to the point of, having sources that are, that you want to compare to each other. So tonight we looked at the Abyssinian cats example, and we found one source that was talking about how all the Abyssinian cats in European countries are descended from Zula, this one British cat from the 1870s that was brought from Africa by a British soldier. And then we had another source that examined the drawn portrait of Zula and concluded that Zula was not an Abyssinian cat. It did. This cat does not look anything at all like an Abyssinian. And and so these two sources are directly contradicting each other. And what you need to do is gather quotes like that and then map them into your notes so that when you get to writing your paper, those notes will be there for you so that you can juxtapose those quotes together. And you'll remember to do that because you've already put that in your notes. Now, let's talk about the CRAAP test. All right. So, as I mentioned before, we're looking at currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. It's pronounced CRAAP. And so tonight, we talked a bit about global warming. We talked a bit about vaccines and the fact that some researchers have actually produced fraudulent research that mistakenly concluded that vaccines cause autism. And something that's important when we're looking at sources is that we don't necessarily know which information is accurate. All right, when we're doing our research, we can judge the currency based on what year it was published. We can judge the relevance based on whether it's about our topic or not. But really, the authority of the person speaking often determines our assumptions about whether or not what they are saying is accurate. And that purpose, what their purpose in saying it and speaking it can significantly affect whether or not we believe that person is biased. All right. So, for example, with the Abyssinian cats, we found a couple sources that were talking about the history of that breed. Okay. And the two sources I just mentioned, both were relatively recent. The years, if we're talking about a breed of cats that has been known since the late 1800s, any source from probably the 1960s onward would be fairly current. Now, on the other hand, if you wanted a source that talks about the genetic lineage of the cats, then you would need something much more current because, genetic science has progressed a great deal, even in the past 10 years. So a genetic analysis of cats from the 1980s would not be current, whereas a genetic analysis of Abyssinian cats made in, the 2010s, that would be much more current and relevant because it's specifically about Abyssinian cats as opposed to cats in general. Now, when we get to authority is a very tricky thing because there are individuals out there who have not been to grad school, who might not have ever majored in the thing they're talking about, but who have done a lot of research on the topic and have become authorities. On the other hand, there are also some individuals out there who have graduate degrees or have a medical degree, and who have chosen to either ignore information or to interpret information in ways that are purposefully biased. And this is why when we talk about authority, we really need to look at each source individually. And we need to look at what are the things that make this person an authority. Okay? So, if we're talking about anything with criminal justice, an FBI agent, by definition, would be an authority on issues of criminal justice. On the other hand, Anne Rule, she is a true crime author. She would be an authority on any of the crimes she has written about because of the level of in-depth research she goes into when writing her when writing the true crime books that she puts together. Um, and so even though, she might not be, say, practicing law enforcement, or, she wouldn't be a primary source because she wasn't present for these events, we would consider her a strong secondary source authority. Um, Now, that said, the accuracy of someone who is, outside of a situation, or someone who has done a lot of research, we ourselves as writers are not necessarily able to judge the accuracy of our own sources. And so this is why you need multiple sources to talk about the same facts. So one common concern I hear from students is students saying, well, I was researching this topic and all my sources are saying the same thing. In some cases, that's actually a good thing, right? If all of your sources are agreeing with each other on a point, then that means that point has a lot more evidence backing it up. It's more likely these sources are accurate. On the other hand, it could also mean that all of your sources came to you through the filter bubble. So, for example, if Google thinks you believe something a certain way, Google will tailor your search results to match what Google thinks you already believe. And so this can lead to confirmation bias. And so this is why we talk about that when you do a research paper, you need sources that contrast with each other. You need sources that have different perspectives that don't always line up, right? You want sources that disagree with each other. It makes your job as a researcher much easier in a way, because when you do your analysis, when you talk about which source you believe more, you have to do analysis to explain why you believe one source over the other. All right? You have to share your opinion, and you're doing that evaluation, which brings up your grade. But something I do want to point out as well is that every research situation is unique. For some papers, anything involving politics, for example, there will be very strong divides in politics, and there will always be two sides. Now, in the U.S. today, because of how polarized politics has become in our country, every issue will have a sizable portion of the electorate believing one thing and another portion believing something entirely different. And for that reason alone, you're almost always going to have to deal with both sides of an issue when you're talking about political issues. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to choose one of those two sides, because it could be that both sides have strengths and both sides have weaknesses. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that you need to accept all sides, right? So there are some political statements out there that are patently false, that you can find evidence to show that they are untrue. For example, like when we talk about global warming, some people will try to turn that into a political topic, whereas in reality, it is a scientifically observed fact of life. The Earth is getting warmer. What that means long term is uncertain. Um, how this will affect our economy and our way of life, you know, things don't look good, but it's uncertain as to how bad they might get, or if researchers might come up with ways to mitigate the problems before they become problems. And so you will have to decide on every topic individually the degree to which you choose one side or choose another side, or admit the uncertainties out there. And so the most important thing to bear in mind is that you want your research to teach you something new so that you can teach your readers something new. All right, so approach it with some humility. Accept the fact that there are uncertainties out there. Accept the fact that you might not even understand all of your sources. Um, I had I once did a paper about migration across the Bering Strait land bridge. During you know some of the most recent ice ages. There is a significant amount of argument about whether or not Native Americans came across the Bering Strait, and if so, when they came across. And so there are some individuals out there who want to argue that Native Americans only came over recently, and so they didn't really own the land. And some people try to use that as justification for European colonization that literally wiped out 95% of the population of the Americas. Other folks, on the other hand, prefer to argue that humans evolved independently here in the Americas, and that is proof that Native Americans owned this land, still own this land, and European colonization was absolutely wrong on those grounds. And the problem with both of those sides is that they are trying to ignore the scientific evidence showing that, genetically speaking, humans evolved in Africa. Humanity has migrated around the world, and, we are uncertain about how much human evolution took place during different time periods and how much intermingling there was between essentially multiple species of humans, right? We had the Neanderthals, we had the Denisovians, we had the, Homo sapiens, ourselves, but we are intermingled with a variety of, different species, subspecies, and so on. And so when we talk about like what to do with research, what you want to make sure you're doing is that you are looking at all these different perspectives and finding ways to respectfully judge, what the reality is, right? So, for example, with the Bering Strait, they've done genetic testing of, individuals, Inuit tribes living in Siberia and Inuit tribes living in Alaska and Native American tribes, up and down the Americas and various Asian communities. And they found genetic markers that clearly came from Asia and came to the Americas. And they found other genetic markers that evolved in the Americas and then came back to Asia. So there's very strong evidence that there was a land bridge, people went back and forth across it. And when you combine that with other evidence, it just indicates the complexities of human migration and human evolution. And if you're going to write a paper, you want to make sure you're capturing complexities like that. So, with that, I hope this has been helpful. And as always, let me know in case of any questions. I'll see you guys next week.